Now, 52 Oscars later, and as I mentioned, I'd been born, we now have to go and look at Ordinary People. Ordinary People tells us a very complex emotional story about the issues faced by a middle-class family after the death of their eldest son in a boating accident. Mother Beth, played brilliantly by Mary Tyler Moore, who was a television star at that point and appeared in her own self-titled show, was nominated for Best Actress. She didn't win, but I think unjustly didn't win. I'll get to that. We have a repressed father, as in Calvin, the brilliant performance from Donald Sutherland, who wasn't nominated that year. And we have Timothy Hutton, who plays Conrad, desperately trying to come to terms with the death of his brother, which he witnessed, remember, and the fact that he is still alive, and he's trying to escape survivor's guilt at a time when America was trying to come to terms with its own surviving after a war, the Vietnam War, which had completely ripped the country apart. Remember, this is the American dream post-Watergate.
You're not hungry, you're not hungry.
Wait a minute, Bev. Hang on a second, you'll eat it. Come on.
There's fresh fruit for you when you get home.
Now let's not forget that the day before this Oscars, someone tried to shoot Ronald Reagan. Quality seems for some to be second to conservatism. I think that's slightly naive to put it, but this may be true in some respects because Ordinary People saw Robert Redford win Best Director. Redford, it's the first time he was a film director, it's significant because he was actually a star and a major star. He was, in fact, I would argue, a superstar, a sex god almost. He starred in hit films which had gone on to win Oscars, and he also starred in a massive financial hit, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So it suggests that this is a safe set of hands, and if we look at the next year's winner, Warren Beatty, we can also understand that Hollywood is looking inwards, the conservative idea that Hollywood always should support its own over others. But that's another theme that we'll pick up later on in this series. But as I've mentioned, Redford's direction was only part of the film's power, but also only part of the reason why it was successful. You could argue Mary Tyler Moore's performance of that restrained repression, and certainly the theatrical elements to that, was what Hollywood was very much supporting, or AMPAS was certainly endorsing. This is important because Hollywood's almost trying to endorse that side of, we are aiming for a middle class audience, we are trying to legitimise that we are an art form, instead of films which they would have considered to have been far more diverse, certainly in themes of content with The Elephant Man, or even films that were dealing with working class or wider spread issues such as Raging Bull. Timothy Hutton wins for Best Supporting Actor for a role that is central to the film, but also is almost an acknowledgement of Oscar seeing itself in the future. It's seeing itself where we want to go next. And that is something else that pops up a lot with Oscars. So we see money, we see legacy, but then we see the future. And we see Hollywood consistently, or especially AMPAS, consistently endorsing itself and nudging itself forward, nodding towards things it wants to endorse and then wants to be progressing. Now, watch this piece and you can see there's a very Freudian slip here, as Martin Scorsese is in shot instead of Michael O'Keefe. And that's interesting. It's almost as if they know he's going to be overlooked and there's going to be an oversight, which there was for some significant years for Scorsese. And this is something that is accepted in Hollywood. Same thing happened to Spielberg, we'll talk about that. Same thing happened to other directors, and later on, or earlier on, we've had directors who are snubbed because of things they've done. Another thing that politically Oscars or AMPAS has always been very regressive and occasionally progressive with. Timothy Hutton's win, though, introduces something that will be a continuing feature in this series. That is size trend analysis. so we can understand the rhythms within the Oscars. But for me, one point that I remember more than anything very vividly is the next film that that brought the Oscars to my attention. This is the film Around the World in 80 Days. In 1956, Around the World in 80 Days won Best Picture. Now, this was not uncommon that a big spectacle film like this would win awards at this time. I mean, to be fair, you had some acknowledgement of that with films like The Greatest Show on Earth, which obviously I'll bring back and talk to later on, and then the next year, The Bridge and the River Kwai. It was a film which won for pretty much all of its technical awards, but had no nominations for acting or any recognition of the acting involved. This is probably because, to be fair, the acting was superfluous to the film itself. It was adapted from a source, a well-known novel as we know, and to be fair, the genesis of the film came more from Michael Todd, the producer, wanting to put on a show in which he could give the viewer a spectacle of colour, imagery, and sights and sounds they'd never seen or hadn't experienced before. This is the case for the cinematography, which is hard quite simply to explain, but is amazing to see. It's one of those things that truly was a technical achievement of its time. The invention of what was then known as the Todd AO 70mm stock film is actually more of a star-studded romp through the world than it is a coherent narrative. You have 51 people gracing this with cameos, people from Frank Sinatra, as we see on the screen, to Marlene Dietrich, to Jimmy Stewart, to, well, pretty much everybody. It's high on production values. It was a crowd pleaser, which is nothing wrong in being a crowd pleaser. And, you know, sometimes I'm a fan of films that are simply crowd pleasing. But this film I found was really an empty visual feast. However, it's significant because it begins to discuss how Oscars often tipped its hat not just to money, but big spectacle films that employed large amounts of people. And that's where I want to come in and say, often, Around the World in 80 Days is treated harshly by critics, and even modern viewers today. They label it as riddled with flaws, offensive in its stereotypes, and occasionally dubious in its treatment of women. I have to say that this is often the case of people who are over-analysing or certainly reading too much into a film. Often we are looking more for something in a film we want to find, we want to seek, we want to look, and I do feel that we have a jaded sense of if a film is from a particular time period, it's going to be misogynistic, racist, offensive, and I personally think that is naive, not a patch on some of the other films that are up for Best Picture at that time, but specifically the film Giant, which is George Stevens' masterpiece, and has some fantastic central performances, specifically from Rock Hudson and a soon-to sadly perish James Dean.
They are Around the World in 80 Days.
Around the World in 80 Days comes across as empty, but I would add that Around the World in 80 Days is not aimed at doing that. It's not even in that ballpark. Michael Todd, who then was well known as Mr. Elizabeth Taylor, wanted to reflect his own abilities within the production of theatre and also construction in a film that would basically marry the two together, and he does a fantastic job. Grown in the film industry, he might have brought more challenging works in. I suspect he would have certainly been interested in making the West Side Story film, which would have been fascinating. He may even tried to remake Wizard of Oz, but that's a kind of urban myth, which I'm not sure how much credibility to add into that. He would not have the glittering career as expected and would sadly be killed in an air crash. film was, simply is, a film about enjoying life, even though it's a spectacular cacophony of imagery and, well, events sequenced across the whole of the globe.
Doing a very admirable job.
Not sure, Quacks. I thought it was supposed to be more, irreverent, kind of, funny, and, well, a bit like, look you, I've told you before, you try and be like me. I had to spend 6 whole months learning how to talk like apparently ducks do. Do you know how much that hurt my voice box? It's kind of like blah. It's a lot of me talking, and my voice is so boring, it kind of drones on. I mean, come on, I thought, you were this great creative mind, and okay, Quacker was kind of rubbish, but, I thought that this was your big chance. I get what you're saying. We need to be more reverent. We need to be more unique, individual, funny, slightly ironic. I don't know how we can do it, but I'll find a way. I always do.